that our ancestors that came before us didn't go through all that they went through so that we can be white Americans or black Americans or hyphenated Americans. They went through all that they went through so that we could be free Americans, free to enjoy what God has given to each and every one of us.
I'm going to go ahead and bring up our speaker. You're not going to be disappointed. He is a dynamic speaker. I promise you, I tell you what, I'll make a bet with everybody. How many's in here? $1. That before we end this meeting tonight, you will be on your feet cheering in appreciation for our country and America, and for the people that are in here. So CL is a pastor. He's been a pastor for 37 years. Is that correct? So you'll hear it in how he speaks and gets you motivated. He's a Fox News contributor. He's a former head of the NAACP in Garland, Texas. He's got quite a resume. He comes from Shreveport. He's got a daily radio show, and like I say, he appears on Fox every so often. He's a senior fellow with FreedomWorks. And I would like you to join me in welcoming C.L. Bryant. I'm just going to do this. Let's do it this way. No, hang on. I'll get you dressed.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And friends, it is a great privilege to be with my good friends in Oklahoma. And I give thanks to God for the opportunity to share again on this day with you. Had a fantastic turnout earlier, and with the large group of people there, elders of the city, was just fantastic. And Rhonda, you're doing a yeoman's work and doing a fantastic job here. Let's give her a hand. All glory to God for the things that He does for us. And FreedomWorks, in case you're not familiar with who FreedomWorks is, we are the largest grassroots organization in the nation. We boast nearly 6 million activists on the ground just like you. And my job, I crisscross the nation once a month, almost every month, not only carrying the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ, but the good news of America. How many of you know that America is the greatest nation on the face of the planet, the greatest success story the world has ever known? I would encourage you to follow me on Twitter at Rev, R-E-V, at Rev C.L. Bryant, and of course freedomworks.org, and you can download the app free onto your favorite device, the C.L. Bryant Show. And at the end of my presentation tonight, I have with me my latest work, A Race for Freedom. It's endorsed by my good friend Sean Hannity and Alan West, the president of FreedomWorks, Adam Brandon, and my pastor, my personal pastor, Pastor James A. McMinnis is endorsed. I'll have it for an offering for you. It helps me continue my work. I'll personally autograph it to all of my good friends and mentors. C.L. Bryant, $20. That's all that is. Cash, check, or charge. My friends, we have a very serious issue facing us in this nation today, and I'm sure all of you are aware of just how serious our times have become for us in this country. In the book of Proverbs, in the 23rd chapter of Proverbs, at that 6th verse, talks about eating at the table of someone who is begrudging or perhaps wanting to use you for nefarious purposes. And in the 7th verse, it says to you that so a man thinketh in his heart. Speaking of the host that has invited you to eat at their table. So a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The warning that is being given in that passage of Scripture, many times we misinterpret that Scripture into thinking that you can think and grow rich and all this type thing, and which, you know, I have nothing against positive thinking, but that's not what the Scripture is saying. It's referring to a warning about eating at the table of people who mean you harm. Right. But yet they smile in your face as they're feeding you. And they're taking account of just how much food that you're taking off the table, so that later on they can call upon you to return that favor to them. When we look at the progressive liberals in this country today and how they manipulate a certain demographic and certain people in our nation, enticing them with free things, friends, I am telling you that you must consider what their thoughts are in their hearts in wanting to give things away free. Amen. When we know that there is nothing that's free. Right. No, kids come home with a puppy and said, I got it free. No, you didn't. It's got to be fed. It's got to be, has shots. It costs money. Nothing is free. Amen. Amen. And so when we look at those free things that are being offered to the American people by the progressive liberals in this country, I am warning you, I am saying to you that we must take into consideration what this passage of Scripture is saying to us. As a man, as a person thinketh in their heart, so are they. And I'm saying to you that the progressive liberals in this country, they have designs on a nation.
Yeah, they do.
And they have designs in such ways that will not benefit this nation. Amen. But will destroy it at its very fabric and its very core. Okay. And it's time for all of us, Americans, to wake up and understand what is at stake here. I want to tell you this, that you get more of what you talk about, and you become what you think about.
Amen. Right. Amen, brother.
What's being talked about in this country today, and why do we have such dissension and such unrest in this country today? Think about it. The news media constantly is talking about discontent. That's what you get more of. You get more discontent because you get more of what you talk about.
That's right.
And you become what you think about. What does the news media talk about all the time? They talk about hatred.
Yep.
And racism.
That's right.
All the time.
Yep.
It's a constant feed of you and I and the country being divided and racist. So you get more of what you talk about constantly.
That's the devil too.
And you get more, and you become what you think about. What do they talk about? They talk about hopelessness. In a land of plenty, in a nation that is the greatest nation on the face of the planet. Amen. That is the greatest success story the world has ever known. Yet, the progressive news media, all they want to talk about, and all they want you to think about, is despair, hopelessness, and a nation whose sun is setting instead of a nation that can be great again, as our president has told us we should be. And every one of you in here tonight, I don't want you to be ashamed of being Americans. Right now, there is a move afoot in this nation to actually cause us to have low self-esteem as Americans. And it's working on your children. Your children go off to college or they go off to school, and it starts as early as elementary school. Your children are taught that the problems in the world is because of us.
That's right.
When we have been the greatest force for good the world has ever known. Amen. Yet the children of our country are being brainwashed. They're being poisoned, and they're being brainwashed and poisoned with your dollars that's paying for schools that are turning out inferior citizens that once was not the case in this country, but it has become this case. It has become that way.
Yes.
And folks, let me tell you something, it has happened on our watch. That's a sobering thing to think. That has happened right under our nose. Your child goes away to college, they come home, you're eating Thanksgiving dinner, and all of a sudden you think, how did Karl Marx sit across the table from me in my house? There is a dumbing down of our young people.
Yes, that's right.
Our young people don't know the American story the way we used to know the American story. They don't teach civics in school any longer.
No, they teach revisionist.
Our story is one that is absolutely vital to the survival of our nation.
Man.
Conservatives, Republicans, Americans, hear me. Your story is being hijacked as we speak here today. Do you remember the president's last State of the Union address? You had these women dressed in white, and they were claiming that they were all representative of women's suffrage.
No, Nazi, triple K.
Let me tell you what that was all about. That was about stealing your story.
Amen.
You see, the Democrats want you to believe, the Democrat women want you to believe that they were responsible for women's suffrage being passed in this country. They were not.
No, they weren't.
Susan B. Anthony was a great friend of the Republican Party, even though she never voted herself. She died before suffrage was passed. Most young people, if you ask them, what party was Lincoln the president of? They'll tell you he had to be a Democrat. Why?
No, he's a Republican.
Because the idea of Lincoln, a Republican, freeing slaves, is absolutely something that our children have been brainwashed to believe a Republican, a conservative, couldn't possibly do. Your story is being hijacked. And the reason it's being hijacked is because we don't tell our story. We don't know our story. You don't know that the Republican Party was founded upon the principles of men being free, and we have stood for that down through these years.
Amen.
But we don't tell that story. And because we don't tell that story, you have an active hijacking of a story that has been bought and paid for. Now, our worldview is changing in this nation for the first time in this country. For the first time, you have age groups of 7 to 17, young people in that age bracket who have never been in a church, a mosque, or a synagogue. Think about that. What does that mean? If ages 7 to 17 in America today, is this crowd begins to age and mature. And you have a generation coming up after the Generation Z generation, as they are called, who have never been in a church. They've never been in a mosque or a synagogue. They have no God consciousness whatsoever. Is it any wonder then that you're seeing a nation of young people, as I said earlier today, who live in the most prosperous nation on earth, but yet they don't want to live?
No, commit suicide.
How is it possible that you live among prosperity, that you can do anything you want to do, you can be anything you want to be in America as a young American, but yet for some reason you don't want to live? How is it possible that we have such an opioid addiction in a nation where in fact you can be all you can be?
Amen.
How is it so painful for Americans to live in this land of prosperity? It's because our world view is being changed in ways that are absolutely detrimental to the health, wealth, and well-being of this nation.
Amen.
And it's happening in places like our schoolrooms, as I said.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Education is, in fact, being changed right in front of your eyes. Worldview can change a nation. Instead of a cognitive education, where 1 + 1 is 2 and 2 + 2 is 4. Something you learn as solid fact. You no longer have a cognitive education. You have an education being taught to your children that creates relativism.
Yes, right.
It's no longer about what you know to be true. It's about how you feel about certain truths.
Absolutely, amen.
And friends, I want to tell you that that's incredibly dangerous. When we think about how we change facts for feelings.
Amen.
That's where we live. We live in a world where facts are no longer facts, but feelings become the reality of your life. And each one of you know that feelings change
Oh, they do.
moment by moment.
Yeah.
And so how do you change the story of America? You don't have to change the history books, my friends. Only thing that's necessary to change are the definitions of the words in the history books. Words like gender,
Oh,
marriage,
oh yeah.
family,
Family.
nation,
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
You don't have to change the history books in America to destroy the worldview that America has and has had, that has made it great. The only thing that's necessary is to change the definitions of the words. Because, as I said to you earlier, we become more. The more we talk about something, that's what we become.
Right.
The more we think about something, that is what we become. So who are we facing down? Friends, I come to tell you we're facing down tyrants.
Yes. Amen.
Tyranny
Amen.
is knocking at the American door.
That's right.
And friends, the warning is that tyranny thrives when it exists among a double-minded people.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
The scripture tells us that a double-minded man is
In
unstable
all of his ways.
in all of its ways, in all of his ways. And if you look at the state of America today, it is in this state because we have been created and we are being persuaded to be a double-minded people. We laugh at things we shouldn't laugh at.
Amen.
We support things we should not support.
Amen.
And we're angry at things that we should not be angry about. How is it possible that we can support the murder of the unborn
Amen.
in this country, yet we want to feed for life heinous criminals
That's right.
who should have been put to death
Yeah.
Amen on that.
long ago?
Amen.
Double-minded people in this country.
Yep.
How is it possible, my friends, that we are not seeing the evolution that progressive liberals are bringing about in this nation? Our foreparents, our grandparents, yours and mine, if they were to come back here today and take a look at the state of our nation, take a look at our children, take a look at what we tolerate from our nation and our elected officials.
Amen.
Take a look at how our children barge into adult conversation. You didn't do that when I was a kid. Take a look at who's running the households in this country. They would think that we had surely lost our way. And they certainly would believe that we had lost our minds
Yeah.
at some of the things that we vote for. Some of the things that are on our ballot would never be on the ballot when our parents and grandparents were running the show. And they turned it over to us. And where did it go wrong? Friends, that is a question we must answer. So you have different definitions of marriage. You have different definitions of gender. different definitions of nation, different definitions of who we are as a people in this country. And we need to pay attention to the deviations that go on in this nation. You see, whenever something deviates from the norm, that is an indication to all of us that something is wrong. It's the deviations that are indicators that we should pay attention. Without deviations from the norm, we'd never know that a child has birth defects. It is how we define ourselves when we deviate from things that are normal. How do we know that somehow, looking at people who are now accepted as teachers in our public schools who mean our children no good?
Yeah, no kidding.
How do we know that something is amiss here? It's because there are certain deviations from the norm that we should pay attention to. But we whistle past the graveyard. We don't pay attention to what's going on. Your child comes home. If they haven't gotten into a fight or been expelled from school, you tell them to go up and do their homework, come down to eat their supper, and you never ask them what they learned in school that day. As long as they are able to go back to school the next day, we really don't care. And we don't pay attention to the fact that progressive liberal educators spend more time with your children than you do.
Yeah, that's right.
For a great length of time during the school year. We don't pay attention to that. And we don't pay attention to the fact of who we are electing to our school boards, our city councils, our commission seats. And we're not paying attention, my friends, to the fact that we are, in fact, failing when it comes to the curriculum that's being taught in our schools.
Amen. That's right.
It doesn't matter if your child is going to a private school or if they're being homeschooled or if you're going to a charter school. If you're not paying attention to the curriculum, you'll find that that curriculum is written by people mostly under 40 years of age, which means that they too have been infected with progressive liberal ideas.
Amen.
And even though they write the curriculum for homeschool or church school, the poisoning is still there.
Yeah.
But we're not paying attention. And so, my friends, when we look at how tyrants gain control, they gain control of a people who are discontented.
That's right. Amen.
People who are constantly told that something is wrong, something is out of whack, something needs to change, and that you are being taken advantage of. That is the mantra of the Saul Alinsky'ites of this world. Create confusion. And that is what's being caused in this country today with a double-minded people.
Amen.
There's confusion. Everywhere you turn, everywhere you look, you see tyrants who don't want you to be satisfied with anything. That's the tyrant's method. In the midst of prosperity, you have black unemployment, historical lows. Latino unemployment, historical lows. Unemployment among women is at historical lows. Women starting businesses at extraordinarily highs. But yet, the tyrants don't want you to be satisfied with that. That's how tyrants take over. A discontented people. Tyrants can't take over a nation that's prosperous and happy.
Amen.
But tyrants take over when they're able to divide and conquer a people who are double-minded.
Amen. That's right.
America is either the greatest nation on the face of the earth or it's not. And you have people who come from Somalia and Mogadishu to Ilhan Omar. Who we housed, fed, clothed when her family came here from Somalia. She experienced the American dream in ways that many Americans who've been here for 6 generations will never experience.
Yeah. Sure.
But yet, she's not satisfied. She gets elected to the Congress, United States House of Representatives. Yet, the progressive liberal socialist ideal that is designed to take down this nation is that of not being satisfied. Always finding something wrong with America, even though she is one of the greatest beneficiaries
Yeah, I know.
of what America is all about.
Ironic.
Isn't it strange? My friends, when we care more about our feelings than we care about liberty, you get tyranny as a result. I'll say it again. When you care more about the way you feel instead of your liberty, you get tyranny as a result. Donald Trump is a target, yes, by the progressive liberals. But they're not necessarily after him. They're after you.
Yep. Amen, brother.
He's standing in the way.
Amen.
So pray for the President of the United States. The American dream, what is it? It has always been 4 things. The ability to keep your family safe, fed, warm, and dry. That's it. That's what it is. It's what it always was when the Pilgrims left England to escape the tyranny of King George. They needed the ability to keep their family safe, fed, warm, and dry. When the runaway slave took it upon herself, to leave the plantation, run toward freedom, even though they didn't know what freedom was, where it was, they wanted the ability to keep themselves safe, fed, warm, and dry. But what was that about? That was about personal responsibility.
That's right. Amen.
Now that's something that's woefully missing in this country at this point in time. The idea that you are responsible for your actions
Amen.
and for your American future. You should be able to keep your family safe, fed, warm, and dry. That is what we are about as Americans. It doesn't matter where we came from. And I hear this all the time, and you hear it all the time, but I want to dispel a myth about America. And the next time you hear it, remember what I told you. I shared this morning. You hear this all the time. We're a nation of immigrants. Not in 2019.
Amen, brother.
We were a nation of immigrants.
That's right.
But now we are a nation of Americans. And that's who we should be. And anyone coming to this nation should want to be an American also. And that, my friends, should be the only litmus test of getting into this country and gaining citizenship, is that you don't want to harm the American experience. And I don't care what anyone says. that is something that is very much worth standing and fighting for, and I will do that, and I certainly hope that you have the determination to do the same.
Amen.
Now, my friends, how do we all get here?
In a car.
Oh boy, so it's one of those nights. We got here by divine appointment.
Amen.
Acts, the 17th chapter of Acts, around the 26th verse, says that God has created all of us from one blood.
Amen. That's right.
And He has determined the bounds of our habitation long before we ever arrived on these shores. That's how we got here. And whether your car was a slave ship, or whether it was a flagship of a sailing vessel coming to these shores, we arrived here by divine appointment.
Amen.
You see, God is a God of space, time, and substance. And when we talk about space, we talk about the room of these fruited plains that we enjoy, that He knew that one day all of us would inhabit. And I know, yes, the Native American may have the greatest beef in this country, but still God knew that a new nation would be brought forth on this continent. And the story of mankind, regardless of where you're from, is a story of human suffering and pain. And America is no different than any other nation that has come along. It has its story of human suffering and pain as well. But no nation has ever overcome the human suffering and the human pain, or even works as diligently to continue to solve that human suffering and pain as this nation does. But yet you have progressive liberals who would like to poison our minds, wanting us to relive times that are gone by, times that we cannot do anything about, and things that we cannot fix that are in our past. So our God that we serve, the God that Jefferson talks to us about, the God that Jefferson felt it necessary to put in our founding documents, the one who gave us that great endowment of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the God that has determined that we would be here tonight sharing this American experience. So He gave us this space of America. And we should be blessed by it from sea to shining sea, and we should appreciate it from sea to shining sea. He is the God of time. I cannot relive my grandfather's time. But for whatever reason, all of us, given to us by this very God, live in a 3-room house. And that house is one that contains the room of the past, the present, and our future. And friends, as you hear cries of racism about things that happened in the past, there's something you need to understand about that one room that we all live in most of our time. It makes us happy, and sometimes it makes us sad. And that's that room of the past. Do you know that when you walk into that room of the past, there's not a picture on the wall or a piece of furniture that you can move around? There's not one stick of furniture, not one memory of the past that you can change. So why is it that we find such comfort here in present-day America? In the past, there are people who have paid with blood for us to be here today, living in harmony in this nation. But yet we want to steal their valor. I always get so upset at people like Black Lives Matter and people like that who claim that they are starting up a new civil rights era. No, we've already fought that war. We've already been through that. The only thing we can do, and hey, I don't know how many of you are as old as I am or older. I'm 63 years old, feeling good, looking good too. No doubt about it. But I remember the 60s. And friends, this ain't the 60s.
Hallelujah.
It's not. And anyone who's trying to get you to believe that, and usually they're a person who's maybe 30 years old. That's the saddest part about it. And it's true, my friend, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
There is no comparison to the America 50 years ago to America today. And every one of us should say, thank God for that. He is the God of space. He is the God of time. And for whatever reason, He has placed us in this space, America. He has placed us at this present time in America. But not only that, He's the God of substance. And friends, God has provided for us the substance to be the American people that is an exceptional people as far as others on the face of the planet is concerned, and that's not arrogant. As Paul says, if I boast in anything, I boast in what God has done in bringing my ancestors here to these shores. I'm reminded of something Muhammad Ali said once after the battle in Zaire that he had with Joe Frazier or George Foreman. Reporter comes up to him and says, Muhammad, now that you've visited Africa and you've regained your crown, and what do you think about Africa? Muhammad, sharp of mind as he was, he quipped almost immediately. He said, I'm really glad that my ancestors got on that boat. And so, and friends, so am I. And you should be too. You should be too. My story could not be told. The substance of my story could not be told if my family had not come here. The story of Barack Obama could not be told in any other country but this one.
That's right.
Yeah.
There is no Obama story anywhere else.
That's right.
The story of Waters, Maxine Waters, her story could not be told anywhere else. Nancy Pelosi's story could not be told anywhere else but here. Your story could not be told anywhere else but here. And so we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we boast in anything, as Paul says, we boast in the fact that God has been gracious to us. Amen. God has created for us a land that is worth the sacrifice that has been paid. In the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son to redeem us from our sins. Time is something that God sees both the beginning and the end of. But Americans, because we are not able to see the beginning or the ending, we must realize in this room that we live in our three-room house today, what we have available to us in our present. My grandfather, and great-grandfather before him, they were illiterate men. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. My father only had a third grade education. And so the elders in my family, they named the boys initials for names. My grandfather was the first CL. My father, he named him LC. His brother was JC and WC. The girls, they would name them simple names like May and Sue. Aunt May, Aunt Sue. And my call myself CL now because my dad told me that he never wanted me to forget just how humble our beginnings were. And so I call my son LC. And now that he has a son, he owes me a CL. And so it goes. I say that to say this as I come to a close here tonight. My grandfather had invited me down. I spent most summers in my growing up years on the farm with my grandfather. It was once a 300-acre place that once a lot of the family moved off, they sold their portions, but Granddad and Grandma, they hung on to 64 acres of theirs, and it's now passed to me. But I'd always go down and help him set new fence posts were needed in the summer. And I don't know how many of you ever set fence posts, but it'll make a man out of you. And it will. And that old man, I was 16. I've been the same height and basically the same size since I was 16. I was strapping. But that old man in his 70s, he could work me right into the ground. They don't make men like that anymore. So one day, he said, come down. I was up in the city, Shreveport. He said, come down to Grand Cane. We got some work to do. I was very Afrocentric back then. I had a huge afro. Dressed accordingly the same way. I had worked hard for both Granddad and waiting tables up in Shreveport to buy myself a car. And it was a jalopy. It was real jalopy. And in fact, the 8-track tape deck that I put in it probably cost more than the car. Now, some of you may be old enough to remember 8-track tape deck.
I do, amen, brother.
My children look at me like a dog looking at a stereo or something when I talk about 8-track tape decks. Anyway, I was playing as loud as I could play on that 8-track tape deck as I was headed down that dirt road to help Papa set the fence post. And I was playing James Brown. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Grandpa must have heard it as I sped down the road, dust behind me, my afro blowing back in the wind. Pulled up on the place. I could tell that he was somewhat upset when I got out of the car because he was walking from the field toward me as I pulled up on the place. And I have all these stories about my family that I love to share with people, and this is one that has brought me to where I am here today as well. As the old man got close to me, he was a pulpwood cutter by trade. Couldn't read, but he was very enterprising, had 3 pulpwood trucks. They called him the saw man, as he was so proficient at cutting pulpwood. His hands were rough-hewn, strong. And as he got close enough to me to speak, he put his rough-hewn pulpwood cutting finger in my face. And he said to me, Sonny, that's what he called me. I didn't go through all that I went through so that you could be black. He said that I went through all that I went through so that you could be free.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Free to go places I'll never go. Free to do things I'll never do. But above all, free to speak your mind. And in a nation as we live in today, where the word police are trying to stifle and stymie the words of free Americans, there is something that we must understand. That our ancestors that came before us didn't go through all that they went through so that we can be white Americans or black Americans or hyphenated Americans. They went through all that they went through so that we could be free Americans, free to enjoy what God has given to each and every one of us.
Amen.
And there is something that I must ask you now as I leave you here tonight. And the question, if you're able to answer it, will in fact determine whether or not our nation continues to thrive and exist as it has for 243 years. Friends, as I tell crowds all over the nation, great and small, many times I find myself in perilous situations where I travel, because as you may suspect, there are many out there who don't like this message. They don't want this message to be told. And they certainly don't want any hearts to be changed. It is perilous times that we live in America today. And it is time for men and women of courage to step forward and to be counted.
Amen.
So the question that I have for you, a question that I have asked across this country for the last 10 years, since I have been with Freedom Works, and it is one that I need to know you understand, and one that you, in fact, can answer both for yourselves and for your posterity. And the question is, are there any patriots left in this country? Is there anyone here who will stand up for God and country, stand up for the Republic, stand up for the American dream? That Americans, stand up! Stand up! Stand up! God bless you. God bless America. God bless you.
You want to take any questions?
Sure, I'd be very happy to.
Do you guys have any questions for CL? The only thing I ask, we only have the one mic. If you will repeat their questions so that we can get it on recording.
Sure.
The question is, will you please tell us about your bicycle so these people can it's important.
He wants me to tell the story of the bicycle, and I'll be very happy to do it quickly. At 7 years old, my father had bought me a brand new bike, and I was very proud of it and was riding it for the first time around in my neighborhood. And a bully, who was a little bigger and certainly older than I was, came along and shoved me off of it and took off on the bike. I tried to chase him down, but he took off. I saw where he went. So I went home and told my dad what had happened. And Dad said, "Do you know where he is?" I said, "Yeah, I know exactly where he is." Well, let's get in the car. Let's go get your bike. So we did. Dad parked about a block away from where the bike was across the street. And the old World War II veteran looked me squarely in the eyes and he said, "Now you get out and go get your bike." Well, I figured since he drove me around there, he'd get out and go get the bike for me, right? Not so. Again, as I just looked at him like he was crazy, you get out and go get your bike. So I did. marching up, the guy who had knocked me off of it, the kid who had knocked me off of it, saw me coming. And just as I put my hand on the bike, he put his hands on me, and we were in boy fashion. We just went at it. It's a real fight. He got the best of me. That day, torn, bloodied, but I rode off on that bicycle. And got home, walked through the door. My mother almost had a stroke. And she asked my father what happened, and I asked me what happened. And I looked at him, and she said, well, why didn't you go get the bike for him? And I said, yeah, Dad, why didn't you get the bike for him? And he said something that I will never forget, and I share it here with you today as I've shared this across the nation. He looked me squarely in the eyes again, and he said, I worked hard for that bike, for you. I sweated. For that bike, for you. And don't you ever let anyone take anything from you.
Amen.
Amen.
That I have worked and paid for without a fight.
Amen.
And so, my fellow Americans, our nation that we live in has been bought and paid for with blood
Amen.
of those who came before us. And we had better never let anyone take this from us
Amen.
without a fight. Yes.
Okay, I do have a question. I know you were talking about what's going on in the schools, with the young people, and one of the things I've heard that's going on, I don't know if people here are aware of it, is that they're bringing drag queens into kindergarten rooms, and they're telling the children about their alternative lifestyle, which I totally disagree with. That is sick. So how do we get involved to stop this denigration of our young people in the United States of America?
I mentioned it earlier. Become school board members.
Amen.
That's what you must do. You can't complain about it. You have to actually engage the system itself. The changing of definitions is what has caused, I talked about it earlier, you don't have to change the history books to change the story of mankind. You just simply change the definitions of words. And that's what's going on. That is what has allowed it. And our young people are of the mindset that you got to keep in mind here as we look at young people who are 7 to 17, and some of them all the way up to 30 years of age. Gay marriage and all that type of thing, abortion is all they've ever known. You do realize that. Some of them may be your grandchildren or your children, but abortion and gay marriage and the lifestyle that we rail against is that's all they've ever known. And they're taught in school that anybody who talks against that, they're haters. So that is what you're up against. You're up against a generation who their teachers are telling them that you're crazy. That's what you're up against. And if you haven't realized that until tonight, then you better realize that the teachers that you send Johnny and Sally off to school to sit under, they're telling them that you're crazy.
Amen.
And your money's paying for that. You have to get on the school board. Maybe not you, but just kidding. But anyway, you have to get on the school board.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. Any other questions? Yes, yes, sir. Go ahead. Go ahead, ma'am.
Last Saturday night, I was sitting in my easy chair watching Fox News, which was nonstop coverage about the young man shooting up the Walmart in El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm older than you, I was thinking back, and it seems to me that the number of these mass shootings seems to be accelerating in recent years. And so I was trying to think back, what has changed, you know? I don't remember this going on in the 50s and the 60s. And then it kind of dawned on me. When Roe versus Wade was decided by the Supreme Court in 1973, the real core decision that they made that day, everybody talks about abortion, but the real core decision, or the real core message that they sent to the American people was that human life has no value.
Right, exactly right.
Okay.
Let me answer your question. In my film, award-winning film, if you have Amazon Prime in your home, you can you can see free in your home tonight. My award-winning film is called Runaway Slave. It's a documentary. Be sure to watch it, Runaway Slave. And in that film, it is the, in fact, Debbie? Yeah. Debbie has the, one of the marquee, this is 4 or 5 years old now, but Runaway Slave is the grandfather, or the father, the godfather of walk-away movement, Blexit, all of the principles that you're hearing a lot of black conservatives talking about now, we talked about that 5 years ago in my film. To answer your question, why gangbanging and abortion and all of that is so prevalent, how can these young black men respect life outside the womb when they have no respect for life inside the womb?
It's not just black men, it's everyone.
When we look at the story of mankind, evil and crazy has no skin color.
Amen, that's right.
It has no racial preference. You said you're older than I am. You remember the Texas Tower shootings.
Yes, yes.
Whitman was the shooter. And he had the whole campus pinned down. A white guy, evil and crazy. And he shot white people. Okay? Y'all all remember the D.C. shooter, the D.C. sniper, John Muhammad.
John Muhammad.
Black man, I was shocked. That a black man, I was shocked. My sister, weren't you shocked that he was black? Black people don't do that kind of
He
thing.
also had this teenager with him, too.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, evil and crazy has no skin color.
Amen.
And they don't care who they shoot. They're evil and they're crazy.
Right.
And why should, in fact, Donald Trump be blamed for evil and crazy when that has always gone on? And when we look at Baltimore, I'm going to give this to you. Elijah Cummings, who I have met on many occasions, great guy in every other aspect except he's a bad politician and a bad representative of the people of Baltimore. How do you blame Donald John Trump for the problems in Baltimore when they have been represented for 23 years by a black representative?
Amen.
How is that possible? What kind of Chinese arithmetic is that? I don't understand that. Yeah, you should see a shed that I built according to Common Core standards. But that my friend is in fact a part of the problem.
What I see is, what this is nihilism.
Sure it is.
It is the rejection of religious and moral principles because
Absolute.
life has no meaning.
Exactly right.
It started by the liberal movement back in the 50s. I'm old enough to remember
It
that.
started before that.
And when they took God out of the school
Yeah.
and they started that move away from God, it's not the guns that are the problem. It's lack of moral direction.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yes, and you had a question.
I'll just add to what she said. The variable isn't firearms, because we've had firearms in our homes since the Mayflower. That's not the variable. The variable is nihilism. And most of our kids don't even know what that word means, but they have it inside of them. And speaking of kids, this is my question. You are a gifted pastor, and I thank you. And I also thank you for your courage, because if I said the same message that you have delivered, and I couldn't do it as eloquently as you, a lot of people say, okay, whatever. When you do it, it has way more impact. And that's also why the progressive left hates guys like you, Walter William, Thomas Sowell, so bad. Because you aren't singing the party line.
Very good.
And you have a moral credibility they would deny me, and they have a harder time denying you. So it takes a lot more courage. And I imagine when you said you undergo some peril, you meant it.
Oh, that's absolutely true.
But my question is this, you're pretty well preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
And you need to preach to the choir, because sometimes the choir forgets to have the courage you're demonstrating.
Right.
But the real target audience is that 7 to 17.
Absolutely.
I know that your average, especially larger school district, they would never let you stand in front of a large student body.
No. But the
How
churches.
do you get your message to those young people?
This is how we do it.
It's not churches, because kids aren't in church.
Many times, if we can find a pastor that has courage, and hear me out here. And the reason I say that is because more and more, my friend, pastors with courage are becoming a very scarce commodity.
Yeah, amen.
Like in Nazi Germany.
And I see my good friend Jesse here tonight.
Yeah.
A very courageous man in his own right. But friends, pastors don't want to get involved with the politics as long as they can continue to enjoy the comfort of the pulpit.
Yeah, but they're gonna pay for that.
Friends, I lost a church because of my stance. A church that I had pastored for 9 years. We had just built a brand new church. The Lord allowed us to build a new church. And I became involved with Tea Party movement, and I had made the film Runaway Slave. And you see the film, you'll see. My deacons, when I made this film, they lost their minds. And all of you, I don't know how many Baptists are in here, but I was a part of the Baptist Association at the time, the National Baptist Convention at the time. And everybody who's Baptist and have been associated with Baptist Church, you know, a pastor is only one deacon meeting away from being unemployed.
Right.
and so it was. But pastors who allow me to bring in the film, and they invite youth from their communities into their churches. What we do, we break the film up into 5-10-minute segments. We play portions of it, stop it, and then we discuss it. We talk about what they have just seen. Most of them don't know who Dr. Thomas Sowell is. He's in the film. Most of them don't know who Herman Cain was. He's in the film. Alan West, he's in the film. Andrew Breitbart, he's in the film. They don't know Glenn Beck, my good buddy. Glenn Beck, even though I know a lot of people may have fallen out with Glenn, Glenn's still a very good friend of mine. Okay? And, but just the same, all of them are in the film. And so even Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, Julian Bond, they're in the film. And so we stop the film. Star Parker, you know, you name them. It's a hit parade. Alveda King, they're all in the film. And so we stop it and we have this discussion. And it's a discussion that is not singing to this choir, because those young people, as you're saying, they've never heard this before. Before I left the NAACP because they wanted me to speak at a pro-choice rally, I left them. And before I left Florida in the 90s, the early 90s, my wife and I left Dallas County. Garland, Texas was the largest bedroom community in Dallas County. And my organization that I was president of, the Garland branch of the NAACP, was the second largest Texas organization, NAACP in Texas, and one of the top 10 in the nation as far as membership was concerned. Magnet schools in Garland happened under my watch. But when we left there, when we left Garland, we moved to Tampa, Florida. And I was dually employed as a pastor, at this time itinerant, and of course I was in finance for years. I was looking for a client and I was flipping through the AM dial and I was hoping to come across Jim Hightower. And I don't know if any of you remember who Jim Hightower was, but he was a commissioner there in Texas. And he was a huge liberal, and I loved to listen to Jim talk. But I came across this guy called Rush. And this was 1991. And Clinton was about to run and was running for president of the United States. And Rush, this guy Rush, was just giving him the blues. I mean, he's just wearing him out. And so I decided to stay right there and listen to this, because I'd never, like the kids we're talking about, I had never heard this before. I mean, I was an NAACP president. I wasn't in tune to hearing nothing like Rush. But friends, I was out and about looking for clients almost every day. And it's amazing how I wandered to the radio dial to tune in Rush. Here's this recovering liberal listening to Rush. And I knew at first that, you know, he's an entertainer. Yeah, I've met Rush on a couple occasions. Great guy. And he's not as, you know, he's a very humble guy. He really is. But the more I listened, the more I said to myself, I believe this. He's right. This is what I think this too. And so the exposure is what was necessary. Just to be exposed to a different point of view. Democrats have people living in boxes.
Oh, they do.
And they feed them what they want, and they want to keep them in the box, because if they ever get out of that box, if they ever leave the plantation, as we say in the film, they'll be free. And that's what we're up to doing.
That's right.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Anybody have anything else?
I have one other question.
Yes.
This is Peggy, by the way.
Hi, Peggy. I'm getting to know you now, Peggy.
I happened to attend a city council meeting last night. And the reason I went there is because we have a vocal group of black folks who are very upset about the Tulsa Police Department. And now, I want you to listen, hear me out, don't jump to conclusions. The purpose of the meeting last night was that they are discouraged and disgruntled because white men or white people make up 50% of Tulsa, but 76% or 77%, doesn't matter, of the Tulsa Police Department are white males. And they just graduated a new academy of 25 or 27 new police officers, and there was not one minority person in that class. And they're mad, okay? Now, I'm not saying that they're not justified in being mad. And they want the police department to look more like Tulsa as a whole, the populace. Tulsa has we have a lot of Asian people, we have a lot of Hispanic people, we have black people, and we have white people, but we have a sizable population of minorities. And I'm not saying that they're not justified in being mad.
Let me speak to it. I am a friend of police around the nation. I've ridden deep nights with police from California to Florida to Texas and Louisiana. I make it my business. I was once a police chaplain. As we sleep peacefully in our beds at night, there are men and women who we have charged to be patrollers of our cities. And they see the underbelly of our society as we sleep peacefully in our beds at night. Black people only make up 12% of the entire population of this country.
Amen.
12%. And even though there may be hubs and places in America where you may have a minority majority, as far as that's concerned, that's what you've described. Black people still only make up 12% of the entire population. And what has happened in this nation, and what you, most of you in here are Caucasian persuasion, you have allowed yourselves to become victims of a tool called white guilt.
That's right.
And it's a tool, and believe me, I've seen both sides of this street. I understand the methods of warfare that's used in race and every other method to divide people and, of course, get your way. I've been an agitator. I've been that. I know what I'm telling you is so. And as long as you don't understand and have a grasp of your history and who you are and what prices that have been paid by a culture that has become an American culture, you'll continue to be used, and the tool of white guilt will continue to beat you about the head. We all now, no longer immigrants, but all are Americans. And when we talk about the police officer, all of us put that badge on their chest. When he or she raises her hands in the middle of the street and stops traffic, it's not that woman or man that's raising their hand to stop the traffic, it's you.
That's right. Amen.
And when you see people pouring water on police officers, when you see people disrespecting police officers, it's not the police officer
No, they're disrespecting.
that they're disrespecting. They are disrespecting the authority of a society
Amen.
that the police officer is sworn to protect and defend.
That's right.
And so the petty arguments, and I certainly hope that you stand in the next meeting that you go to and tell them just how petty that argument is when you're talking about men and women who I know would run toward any bullets that starts firing right now, regardless of the color of anyone's skin who they'd have to protect. It sets me on fire. It just makes me so angry when I hear people attacking our men and women in blue, because that thin blue line is the difference between safety and chaos.
Amen.
Don't forget it. Yes, sir.
I want to thank you for being here and for your courage and for the fact that you speak the truth. And that's a rare commodity anymore in our day-to-day life, unfortunately.
God be praised. Thank you.
People, but I have a question.
Yes, sir.
For good neighbors to the south in Texas, since you spent a lot of time there, it appears that Texas is rather rapidly turning blue, or some shade of it. It's very important that we keep the electoral votes from Texas on the red side of things. Would you comment on how you perceive the seriousness of that, and if you think it's as serious as I do, what can we do about it?
Austin, Texas is a bastion of liberalism.
Yeah.
Houston is the same way. San Antonio is the same way. My friends, if Texas falls, we will never win the presidency again. California has already fallen. New York has fallen. Now, there are people in droves moving to Texas every day. Of course, I live in the neighboring state. We're not quite as prosperous as Texas, but we are the greatest state in the Union, and that is Louisiana.
Wait. Now, being from Louisiana and from South Louisiana, Shreveport actually does belong to Texas.
No. I counter with this. Parts of Texas was once a part of the Louisiana Purchase. Most of the country was Louisiana.
Texas was one part of Mexico.
Now, back to your question. Thanks for the levity that we have here. Texas must remain, as we call it, a red state. But this is the peril that we face with North Carolina, even Georgia, and that you have people fleeing the Northeast.
Yeah.
You have people fleeing California.
That's right.
And they're going to places like Texas
That's right.
and Georgia. And they're coming south. They're coming south.
And they know why they're late.
And they know where they're going, and they know that what ideas they're bringing with them.
Yeah, they are bringing those liberal ideas.
And you can believe this. They're running for school board.
And they drive that way too.
They're running for your city councils.
Of course they are.
And they're bringing their northeastern ideas, they're bringing their California ideas to the places where they're going. And hey, listen, I'm a Southerner through and through. My family, we've traced our lineage. We've been here since right after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, all the way back to 1778.
Wow.
Is when my family came here, and on both sides, I'm not only from roots in Nigeria, but I have Scots-Irish blood too. Bryant is actually my name. And so it's not a slave name that we took off the plantation. It's actually, my father was, well, it's a long story. You understand it being from southern Louisiana. Yes. We were the other children. Yeah. But friends, it is important, very important, that we recognize that there is a design to turn Texas blue, and it's very well on its way. Beto O'Rourke is totally crazy. It's just nuts. Man is nuts. But the question that you have to figure out is, how did he get to where how did he give Ted Cruz such a run for his money? And he did. How does AOC and Tlaib and Omar and Presley, how do these people materialize like they have? There's a design here.
Yes, there is.
And you better be aware of it. Listen, God bless you all, and God keep you all. Thank you so much.